Good afternoon, everyone. I am Larry Smith, and I'm the Vice President for Research. And it's my privilege to attend this remote meeting of the Department of English. Welcome to the D. Wynne Thorne Lecture, the opening event of USU's Research Week, which is a week-long celebration of USU's exceptional research and researchers. This is my first research week as part of the Office of Research, but 2019 marks USU's 15th annual Research Week. Immediately following the D. Wynne Thorne Lecture, we will hold a Faculty Research Award ceremony where we will honor Researchers of the Year from every college, as well as this year's D. Wynne Thorne Career Research Award recipient. Looking ahead to the other events this week, tomorrow afternoon, the Faculty Author Exhibition will celebrate 33 new books authored by USU faculty members and hear from three of our recently published authors, Christopher Mons, Victor Lee, and Lynn McNeil. The event will take place tomorrow at 3:30 in the New Books Lounge here in the library. And by the way, I want to extend a huge thanks to the library for arranging the use of this space. It's really beautiful, and thank you very much. Also, later in the week, the Student Research Symposium, which is 2 days ago, giving both undergraduate and graduate researchers an opportunity to practice their poster and oral presentation skills, and that will also take place here in the library. At this symposium, nearly 400 students will present their research, again through posters, performances, oral presentations, and so forth. On Friday, the Student Research Award ceremony will take place, and there we will also make several awards to a number of grad students and undergraduates. You can always learn more about these events at rw.usu.edu. But today, we will be hearing from last year's D. Wynne Thorne Career Research Awardee. The D. Wynne Thorne Career Research Award, named after USU's first Vice President for Research, was first awarded in 1979. Each year, the university selects one outstanding faculty member to receive this highest research honor. Awardees are recognized for career-long contributions of high quality and impact, and who are renowned nationally and internationally. We're especially pleased and honored that joining us this afternoon is Sandra Thorne, daughter of Dr. D. Wynne Thorne. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. Now in its 41st year, the D. Wynne Thorne Award will be awarded this year to Dr. Charles Hawkins, a professor in the Department of Watershed Sciences, and Chuck is with us. Chuck, if you'd like to stand and recognize. And we'll have a lot more to say about Chuck and the faculty awards ceremony immediately after this event. But again, getting back to this moment, we will hear from the 2018 awardee, Joyce Kinkead, professor in the Department of English and former Associate Vice President for Research. And to introduce Joyce will be Dean Joe Ward from the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. Joe.
Joyce Kinkead is the 2018 awardee of the D. Wynne Thorne Research Award. She's the third English department faculty member to receive this honor since it was created in 1979, but the first member of the English faculty to win the award for winning the most awards. Joyce received her master's in English from the University of Central Missouri and her doctorate from Texas A&M with emphases in composition and rhetoric and American literature. Before coming to Utah State, she was an assistant professor of English at Pittsburg State University in Kansas. Joyce has now been at USU for 36 years. She's taken on the role of Director of the Writing Center, Director of the Writing Program, Creator and Director of the Writing Fellows Program, Associate Dean for the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, Vice Provost, Associate Vice President for Research, among other roles. Joyce led the USU Undergraduate Research Program for 11 years as the Associate Vice President for Research from 2000 to 2011. During her time, she brought about many advances in the program, including research on Capitol Hill, an annual event in which Utah State and University of Utah students present their research to Utah policymakers, as well as the Undergraduate Research Fellows program, which provides scholarship funding and opportunities for students to engage in research from their first day on campus. She also established the Utah Conference in Undergraduate Research. She's helped increase the number of students participating in undergraduate research, as well as increase the number of those students winning awards for the research. Her impact in undergraduate research at USU, and indeed nationally, is unmatched. Along with her passion for student research, Joyce has dedicated her time to further her own research in the field, which focuses in writing studies and undergraduate research. With 13 books, 15 book chapters, and numerous academic articles, her publication count surpasses that of most faculty members on campus. Much of her work is at the forefront of her fields, notably her book, Research Writing, which was the first book on research methods for writing studies for undergraduates. Over her long service at USU, Joyce Kinkead has received multiple fellowships and awards. Last year, she was named as part of the first cohort of distinguished professors by the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. In 2013, she was designated as Researcher of the Year by the College of Humanities and Social Sciences and the Department of English. That same year, she was named Utah Professor of the Year by the Council for the Advancement and Support of Education and Carnegie Foundation. She initiated USU's nominations for the Carnegie Professor Award in 1995. Since then, 14 USU professors have been so honored. She's also a fellow for the Council of Undergraduate Research, the first and only humanist to receive this prestigious fellowship. The number of honors Joyce has been awarded is a testimony to her dedication to research, teaching, and service. Her presence is especially felt here in Merrill Kazir Library, where multiple areas of the building, including the Undergraduate Research Spotlight Wall and Atrium, have been dedicated to her. Over the years, she's mentored 20 undergraduates, served on 20 master's and doctoral candidates committees, and headed the initiative to provide research funding to those in the humanities, an overlooked area in the research world. In addition to her work at Utah State, Joyce Kinkead's career has taken her around the world. She's a two-time Fulbright Scholar conducting research in both Cyprus and Sweden. Her work has also taken her to South Korea, where she was a visiting professor of English at Kim Il-sung University in 1999. Please join me in welcoming Professor Joyce Kinkead.
Thank you. This is just an extraordinary day for me. I want to thank the research office and its staff for their support and help, and particularly honor Bronson McIntyre, whom I've worked with for many, many years. I also want to thank my own Department of English, particularly Jeannie Banks Thomas, my department head, and the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, and I've just had enormous support from them. I'm so honored to be the 40th D. Wynne Thorne Researcher. Now, the Thorne name means a lot to me. I didn't have the pleasure of knowing Wynne Thorne, but I knew Allison Thorne, Dr. Allison Thorne, quite well. And I admired her and her 5 legendary children. Okay? I think a you know, if you didn't know Dr. Thorne, she was the only faculty member at USU to be promoted from lecturer to full professor in one fell swoop. Okay? And we even have, it's just a good luck token for me, the lectern that she used to deliver her centennial lecture, and it was the same lectern that her father used in 1910 when he was debating as a student at the AC. So, I dedicate this lecture to Dr. Allison Cummers Thorne. So let's go. For more than 40 years, and believe me, that hurts to say, 40 years, I have been a teacher and a researcher of writing. I entered the field at a really exciting time in the 1970s. There was a paradigm shift from a product approach to teaching writing to a process approach to teaching writing. And that came about because of research in writing studies, cognitive studies in how people really think about writing. Previously, writing instruction had focused on mechanistic ways of writing and a lot on grammar, but that's not truly how people write. So over these last 4 decades, okay, I have been at the forefront of several movements in writing. Writing centers, writing across the curriculum, computers and writing, and undergraduate research in writing studies. And it's particularly heartwarming to me is that now we have moved across the nation into undergraduate degree programs in writing studies. Although we have these programs in writing studies, I saw gaps in our curriculum. And one of them was in undergraduate research. There was no research methods textbook for undergraduates in this area. And I wrote one. I still see some gaps. I think it's important that we prepare our students to think and write about writing in a big picture way. But no one has pulled together this marvelous material so that it's accessible and meaningful. And that's my current project. While writing is a big story, I'm choosing an age-old format to introduce 5,000 years of writing, a primer. So I promise you that this lecture is more primer than encyclopedia. So it may be writ large as my title, but you're getting the abridged version so that we can get out of here today. And just a note that there's a matching game, a little quiz for you that are on your chairs. And as I go through my lecture, I think you'll find some answers. You didn't know this. And at the end, you'll get all the answers about that. So I hope that will engage you about thinking of the long, long history of writing. Then I have to let you in on a little insider of Thorne research winners. Several years ago, one of the Thorne winners giving a lecture said, I think it's important in these lectures that we show how we are all connected in an interdisciplinary way. Okay? So Thorne alumni, you will find subtle hints to your different areas within my talk. This past fall, I purchased an around-the-world ticket from Delta to visit over 24 sites in the history of writing. Today we're going to take a whirlwind tour of some of those, and as I said when we took off in August, fasten your seatbelts. Writing does some really heavy lifting in our society. It's essential to knowing. It's also how we tell our stories. It's an everyday aspect. It's ubiquitous, but we often take it for granted. I'm going to talk about 6 areas in the history of writing. There are many, many more, but these are really foundational to the history of writing. First, origins of writing. Humans only began writing about 5,000 years ago. They were doing art tens of thousands of years earlier than writing. So here are 4 sites on early writing, and I want to touch on each one of these individually. Writing began in Mesopotamia, an important trading region, and it was to record economic transactions. So the emergence of cities and states resulted in more complex societies that needed written records. Memory, oral tradition would no longer suffice. They needed writing, and so they developed cuneiform, which is our very first writing system. You can find cuneiform tablets in our own Museum of Anthropology. They demonstrate the diversity of their uses. They were economic transactions like grain, and they were also real estate transactions. Scribes went to school to learn how to write. These are a couple of images from the Louvre in Paris. You see here the iconic Egyptian scribe with the stiff kilt, the tableau in his lap. Might this be our first laptop? And then next to him is a cuneiform tablet. I can just imagine an archaeologist getting hold of this tablet and translating it to see what it was going to say. It's a schoolboy's essay. And it says, "What did I learn at school today? I wrote on my tablet, I recited my tablet, I had lunch." So much for that. But I have to tell you, for a writing teacher, it brings joy to our hearts. So while ancient Sumer used writing for practical reasons, Egyptian priests wanted to use writing to commune with the gods. And so hieroglyphics, higher writing, was an essential aspect of civilization yet. Like all of these other ancient languages, though, no one knew how to interpret hieroglyphics until Rosetta Stone came along. And it was a self-educated Frenchman, Champollion, who finally cracked the code on the Rosetta Stone. A third approach to writing occurred in China. They wanted to know the future. They were divining. So think about this as reading tea leaves. But what they were doing was taking bones, usually the scapula of oxen or turtle shells. They were putting them in the fireplace, and the cracks and the marks made on those bones were then read or divined. And they would be able to say to everyone, "Oh, we've got some hostile enemies coming our way," or "This is a good time to plant our crops." A fourth system occurred in Mesoamerica, much, much later than these three. Okay? This was the system of glyphs. Here we have the Dresden Codex, and this is one of only four Mayan manuscripts that survived. Those darn conquistadors and priests burned everything else. And this one in Dresden is the only one that's publicly accessible. So now I'm going to turn over to what happened after these lost languages. And we're going to look at the writing systems that followed. And one of the reasons we needed new writing systems was there was so much more data that needed to be recorded. Okay? So increased trade meant that writing needed to be more efficient. So do you really have to draw an ox head every time? Okay. So that's what the scribes were doing, was having to do these pictures. And might we have instead a symbol that stood for a sound, a phoneme, okay? So the Phoenician traders had this wonderful circuit they did in the Mediterranean. And we owe to them this more standardized alphabet that we have now. Their alphabet had 22 consonants in it. And then it was the genius of the Greeks to add around 800 BC vowels to go into that alphabet. But not all languages are one symbol, one sound. Syllabaries are a symbol for a syllable. Okay? The most famous of these is the Cherokee syllabary, and that was developed by Sequoyah in 1825. And then the third system is in China, and that one uses pictures. Okay? So you can imagine now how we're increasing as we go along here. So Chinese writing developed from pictographic script about 3,000 years ago. And so each of its letters have symbolic meanings. The number of characters, 80,000. 80,000, okay? And the everyday user needs to know 3,000 to 5,000 just to get along. Okay. Next topic, our writing implements. What do we use to write? Keep in mind that these implements often determine the look of the writing. The Chinese character, a brush. In ancient Rome, using a chisel, clay, stone, those letters were very angular. For cuneiform, the reed stylus was used to scratch these marks on wet clay. And then the clay tablets were dried, and the markings became permanent, okay? So that could not be revised. And it was really kind of cumbersome. So here we have this famous fresco for Pompeii, and the woman's holding a wax tablet. I have a little miniature here. So it's a piece of wood, and then recessed in here is in wax. Okay? So the writer would write in the wax like this. Okay? And you say, I've got something else I want to write now. So they took the other end of it and would rub, and the friction, the heat of this would erase what was written there. Now the Romans thought that this was just like their minds. And what they said was that our minds are like a wax top tablet. We write, we erase, we write again, we revise. Okay? And so that is our tabula rasa. And what about ink? We can't have writing without ink, can we? As it turns out, it's not Indian ink, it's Chinese ink. So once again, that wonderful civilization is at the forefront. Ink was typically made from carbon black or oak gall and iron sulfate. And on my little props table over here, I actually brought some oak gall ink. Again, pen and ink were really nice to have. These cool pens, I like. But they were not very portable, again, and they were also could be quite expensive. So then we have the pencil coming in. And the pencil made a very good entry in England when a storm revealed a pure graphite vein in the Cumberland area. And shepherds discovered that graphite, and they were using it to mark the side of their sheep. Yeah. But then somebody said, oh no, we really could use that for writing. And so that became a very important industry for England. This graphite was so valuable that it became a very hot topic in the smuggling industry. But you always knew who was guilty. Okay? And that's where we get the term black market. Okay? But it wasn't just England that had pencils. They became a big business all over Europe, but Germany was a leader there. We think about Nuremberg, Germany as being a site of the Nazis, right? They're also the pencil capital of the world. And this is a workshop in Nuremberg, and pencils were made like this. So there would be two wooden slats, and then the graphite core would be inserted. These would be glued together, and then string wrapped around them, and it would be sealed with wax. And they would be stacked up like they are here to dry. And then the pencil company sent the sellers out. In fact, it was pencils that really started branding in the industry because these companies wanted to demonstrate the quality of their products. And so here are two competing families on that. But that's not my favorite advertisement. My favorite advertisement is this one, okay, where the pencil is truly the sword. Okay? And don't we know that? So it's not just that pens are mightier than the sword, it's the pencil. Okay? The quest for efficient and inexpensive writing continued. And one of my very favorite stories is about the Baltic pen. Two brothers, the Biro brothers, were Hungarian Jews in World War II. And they had to flee Hungary to escape Hitler. They land in Argentina. They had developed the ballpoint pen. They figured out that action, how to make ballpoint pens. And so they started producing them. They're not going anywhere, but then the British Royal Air Force buys 30,000 ballpoint pens from them. And the pilots loved them because they could write at altitude, and that assured their success. And so in some parts of the world, the ballpoint pen is still called the biro. Okay, we have delete keys now, but what did people do before there were delete keys? Sometimes you want to get rid of that writing. So the erasing knives were how ink was removed for writing. But the most popular method before 1770 was breadcrumbs. You had a ball of moist breadcrumbs that you would use to erase the ink that you're writing with. And that was until Joseph Priestley went to reach for his ball of moist breadcrumbs and instead picked up a ball of India rubber. And he started rubbing that on the writing, and that, he said, wow, that really did a great job. Okay? And in the UK, they still refer to what we call erasers as rubbers. Okay? Now, in my day, when we used typewriters, okay, yes, okay, I did typewriters. Computers weren't around when I was a student or even as the new assistant professor. We turned to other methods. Betty Nesmith was a single mother working in a typing pool. She was a really bad typist. So at night she worked on developing liquid paper in her kitchen. She became a millionaire, and that funded the music lessons of her famous son, Michael Nesmith, who's a founding member of the Monkees. Yes, where are you people? You know who I mean. Okay, now I've got to go back once again in time to talk about paper, because paper is so important to us. Each of us uses about 675 pounds of paper every year. But before there was paper, people used other things. And I was fascinated to learn that in China, bamboo strips were used. And this is why their writing is vertical. It's because the material defined how they could do their writing. Other cultures use tapa bark, papyrus, or other what we call proto-papers. And in Europe, animal skins were used to produce parchment and vellum. Again, very expensive. It was in China that paper was invented, and it's a much more transportable and less expensive product. This is a charming mural from a wall in a 14th century paper mill that I visited in France, and I love this penetration of first papers from China to the West. And this occurred, China was not about to give up the secret, but it drafted some paper makers into its army. They got captured in Samarkand, which is now Uzbekistan. And in order to gain their freedom, they gave up the secret recipe for making paper. And that's how paper spread. Now, to truly be paper, materials have to be macerated into a pulp. And here I am in this 14th century paper mill, stirring the pulp vat. And then what I get to do is dip the screen into that vat, pull it out, let the water drain, and then we take that page off the screen. It goes between felt pieces, and then it moves into a press after that. And this is Sampson the press. This is at Georgia Tech University, has a fabulous paper museum. So when you've got about 100 pages between this felt, the press goes in and dries them even further. And then they get hung up on a line to dry. Okay? But in Asia, there was a different approach. Asian paper was kept in the screen, and it goes on the hillside to dry naturally. This is in Kathmandu, Nepal, and they are continuing their 1,500-year-old tradition, as there's a real growing market for artisan paper around the world. This is a little ditty about rags to riches. So wood pulp comes in as a material 1844. So until that time, it's all about rags and cloth. Okay? So this is a ditty about the importance of rags to the paper industry. In colonial America, children were actually taught rag lessons, kind of like we do reduce, reuse, recycle now, rag lessons. Housewives were given interior decorating tips on how to have the charming rag in their living room, so they didn't miss an opportunity. And young ladies, they were advised to take that worn out hanky to the paper mill, because you never know when it might return to you as a BA due on a loan letter. Okay, over to the book, okay? This happens to be Seshat, and she's an Egyptian goddess, and she's my favorite Egyptian goddess because she is the one who is foremost in the house of books. Of course, books were really scrolls then. Our books are rooted in the Codex tradition, and it makes a difference what happens there. This is a book with a chain used in the Middle Ages for securing a volume to a podium or shelf. And that's just how valuable and valued books were then. Okay, the Bible took 300 sheepskins to make. Over a year to have copy of the Bible. Just imagine how expensive that is. So literacy rates naturally were very, very low. Maybe the nobility did not even know how to read and write. Charlemagne was one enlightened ruler who said that in France, what we know as France now, at least 2 boys from every village had to learn to read and write. Gutenberg, our hero, he worked for decades to create a press that would produce editions of the Bible that were correct and uniform before he was successful in 1455. He demanded a high level of security and loyalty and secrecy from the workers. They were at risk. Well, why were they at risk? It wasn't clear that people would be happy about a machine-produced Bible. It was really audacious of them to imagine, would it be accepted by the church or not? They could have been burned at the stake easily. But Gutenberg is not necessarily so much an inventor as he is an innovator. So he took old wine and olive presses to make them into printing presses. He had to develop the chemical formula for the metal type because it was going to be reduced to very extreme pressures. It had to develop a font for that. And they even had to develop, when they had the type done, how the compositor would get the type and put it in to the composition. Okay? And the capital letters were put in the uppercase, and the regular letters were put in the lowercase. I don't want to miss out in telling you this, something I discovered this last year, is that Gutenberg was not first. The first movable metal type occurred in Korea 75 years before Gutenberg. And they printed Shikji, which are Buddhist sacred texts. So the invention of movable metal type provided the foundations for groundbreaking change. In fewer than 50 years, there was an amazing change in the map of the world as well as how much people knew. People wanted to know information. They wanted to read. So let me just mention 2 aspects that came about as unintended consequences. One was spectacles or eyeglasses. So because people wanted to read, there was more research and development in eyeglasses, in lenses. Not only did it improve glasses, it led to the creation of a microscope. Second innovation I found out about at a pharmacy museum in Heidelberg is that recipes for pharmaceuticals became standardized in these printed books, and the excellent illustrations of botanicals led to a major improvement in medicine. Where are women in all this? That's a question I'm always asking. They were usually in the basement with the children, sorting, cleaning, the rags for the paper mills, so they were doing menial tasks. Very few women were allowed to be printers. In fact, the only women who could run their own print shops were the widows of printers. So the guilds did not allow women to have print shops. Charlotte Guillard is one of those women. She was working in the 16th century. She was known for her wonderful Greek and Latin texts, for their accuracy and their beauty. So with the printer originally functioning as the publisher as well, that was okay until you've got 20 million books out there in the world. And so the printer and the publisher divided and became two different businesses. And booksellers were hired to get the books out on the street, maybe in this kind of rig. In Paris, they allowed 12 bookstalls to be placed on the Seine River. And as you go through Paris now, you can still see that there are bookstalls there. Early books didn't necessarily look like what we see now. They followed manuscripts more often than not. It was only when the readers needed to have tools in the books to help them read that the title page, chapters, and even page numbers were added. People worried about the widespread knowledge and how this might foment rebellion or even distraction. And it's true. Books are very distracting. And here's a German cartoon from the 19th century of a nanny who's gotten so wrapped up in the book she doesn't even realize that she's lost her young charge out the back of the carriage. I want to share one more instance of how Gutenberg's invention continued to be influential. Some 400 years after Gutenberg, the printing process had changed very, very little. It was still using the same kind of presses. This is in Hawaii, and Hawaii had no written language. Christian missionaries from Boston came in 1823, and shortly after they arrived, they brought this decrepit printing press around the Thorne to them. They immediately started figuring out how to write in a Hawaiian language, which takes a lot of A's, I's, and K's, by the way, and they never had enough of those letters in their font cabinets to work. But anyway, with the backing of the royalty, the Hawaiian nation went from zero literacy, really, in the 1820s to 98% in 1860, surpassing the literacy rate of New England even. So I've had a fabulous experience this last year with my round the world ticket. Now I've learned to use a penknife to trim a quill, how to make a page of paper and how books evolve. But I've also come up with some overarching messages or lessons about the history of writing. As I told you, I'm writing a book, I'm writing a studies primer. And these are some of the facts I'd like my students to know, to think about. That writing is grounded in the practical and the divine. So when agriculture developed, we had to have ways to record those agricultural transactions. They required expertise in bookkeeping. But they also developed gods and goddesses along the way, and scribes would invoke Nisaba in Sumeria, for instance, to help them as writers. Even today, writers continue to call on the muses from Greek mythology. Sometimes they're listening and sometimes they're not. Or as Ann Patchett says, sometimes it feels like the muse has gone out back for a smoke. Innovation. difficult. At the very beginning, there was censorship to the printing presses. And so printers sometimes had to leave their home cities and go to more open and liberal cities like Antwerp, Basel, and Venice. A printer in Paris was burned at the stake for being an atheist, being pronounced an atheist. That's a long time ago. Originally, pencils did not have erasers on them. And when in the United States erasers were added, teachers rebelled against erasers on pencils because they thought their students would do it right the first time. So when I and others introduced computers into our writing program in the mid-1980s, do you know what our students said then? Is this a computer class or is this a writing class? They were unhappy. There are efficiencies that come with trade-offs. So when when wood pulp came in to be used for making paper, immediately we have short-term profits and greed outward. So forests were being decimated, and it created the need for schools of forestry in the United States, the first one being established at the Pittsburg State in North Carolina, and they brought German professors over to help establish those schools. Utility versus aesthetics. So we like the fact that we have easy access and mass production of books, to get books like Penguin or pocketbooks in the hands of people. But some people around the turn of the century, like William Morris, were concerned about the loss of the aesthetics of the book. And he said that in the Middle Ages, the books were beautiful, and we should never lose that attribute of books. And so he went about establishing his own press, and we continue that tradition today with letterpress printing. And finally, I think we all need to remember that access is not only always equitable. There's still 1 in 5 people in the world who do not have access to literacy tools. One of the backlashes that I think is quite good, actually, is what I would call slow writing. So you're familiar with the slow food method, your movement up there. And as I look at the history of writing, I see signs that some of these old ways persist. Some writers yearn for that tactile sense of pen, ink, and paper. As Stephen King said, the best word processor I have is a legal pad and a fountain pen. So I think the letterpress and also the return of calligraphy is very important signs about slow writing. I'd like my students to remember that every day we make choices, and we need to be critical about those choices. We're really happy to have these disposable pens, aren't we? 1.6 billion pens are in the landfill every year. How much screen time do we use? What is our computer's use of energy? And how can we be more environmentally sensitive? Most of all, I want my students to know that writing changed the world, and it is within their power to improve the world through writing. Writing surrounds us in our everyday lives. For thousands of years, people only spoke and didn't write at all. Writing helped us to organize societies. It formed the basis for science and literature. Writing permits us to communicate beyond time and space and to leave records that endure. This is a very expensive pen company, and you can get wonderful fountain pens for hundreds, even thousands of dollars. But I love their motto, refill your soul by writing. So if this presentation has wedded you to get a round the world ticket or just go down the road to Provo, you can actually find really neat sites in the history of writing. So the Crandall Printing Museum in Provo has a replica of the Gutenberg Museum. I'm so proud of this website that was developed by my undergraduate researcher, Morgan Wickstraw. It's the start of the National Undergraduate Research Week, and it was an honor to work with Morgan and have her inspire me. I have dozens of acknowledgments for people who gratefully and generously opened their doors. There's Katrine at the end there, who let me in to see the Dresden Codex, even though the exhibit was closed, and I had to go through several levels of security to finally get to her. There's just lots of folks there to acknowledge. I want to acknowledge the person who gave this lecture 7 years ago, David Lancey, who's been a fabulous travel companion when we're on the road or at home. And then you can get a sense, I think, of where my research led me this last year. The round the world ticket took me so many places. And finally, I want to acknowledge you for attending today. My career as a researcher for the last more than 35 years has been sustained and supported by this campus, this community. Thank you so much.
All right, I think that Joyce had us fabulous. Thank you for sharing that. I love your perspectives. It was great. I think we have time for questions from the audience. Joyce, can you answer that? Perfect. Okay, John?
Joyce, do you have a comment on digital recording or writing?
Not visible. So Jan, can you explain yourself a little bit more there? Sure. So writing digitally and that's absolutely true. I mean, is anyone housing their emails, for instance? The letter is extraordinarily important genre and documenting our history. And we have people like that in Savigny, 17th century France. Her letters are so good that they actually tell the history of Paris. And they were compiled in a book while she was alive. I don't know the answer to that. We have just scads of information. We think about that, writing people about because we needed to record information, and therefore, just imagine how much more information we have now. What's going to be said? We decide that's a good point. Fortunately, we have projects, if I can say, like our digital folklore, in which the outstanding examples are being reviewed annually and saved. Another question? Yes, Chris.
So, do you think emojis are like the new technology or a 5,000 year step back? Emojis?
There's nothing new. Okay. It's like I'm writing a chapter on social media, and my colleague Laughlin said that I have to go back to ancient Pompeii because the graffiti on the walls there is really social media. So let's think about it in that kind of way.